Although Mr. Shaw first designed the bridge as a simple truss bridge, once Mr. Schell decided to make it a memorial bridge, the plans were revised to make it more architecturally pleasing.
He decided that he would make it a memorial bridge and a memorial to his parents. And when he made that decision, first he was in the middle of deciding to build a bridge, and it was going to be a fairly ordinary bridge. But once he decided to make it a memorial bridge, he talked with the architect, and they added some features to the bridge that sort of made the bridge really jump up to become rather spectacular. And those features, they're called sort of Gothic features. If you ever have an opportunity to look at the bridge, it almost looks like a cathedral as you're walking through. And then there are other Gothic features on the bridge that make the bridge much more than just a plain old iron bridge. The bridge arcs in such a way that it almost follows the arc of the earth. And so it has this organic feature to it that makes bridge architects and engineers just really ooh and ah over the bridge.
The Schell Bridge is a beautiful and rare example of the cantilever truss construction. There aren't many of them left in the country. It is one of the few architectural remnants we have of the real heyday in Northfield in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
And of course in New England, the most famous bridges are the covered bridges, but these iron bridges are not being built anymore for the most part, and this is just a superb example of that.
The 515-foot-long bridge has a span that gracefully curves, with a distinctly light and airy appearance, described by one newspaper as a single ground arch leaping from one bank of the river to its opposite 400 feet away. The same newspaper article described it as highly artistic in effect and beauty in all its details.
And in fact, it was selected to be one of 30 that was investigated back in the early 1990s as one of the great historic bridges in this country. And there's information on the Library of Congress, the American Memory Library of Congress.
Schell also donated an extra $6,000 and requested that 2 Gothic Revival plaques, memorials to his father, be fastened to the decorative concrete end posts at the eastern edge of the bridge. Schell chose a location for the bridge not in the center of Northfield, but in the northern end of town. This provided a grand and scenic entrance to the areas of Northfield that had been developed by Dwight L. Moody and the schools.
The siting of the bridge is interesting, and that he wanted to highlight the new campus that had just been built. And so he made sure that when the people got off railroad and got into their little horses and buggies to come up across the bridge, you've got this wonderful vista of the campus as you went over the bridge, and that's why it's sited where it is rather than being more toward the center of town.
From the bridge entrance on the west side, the visitor could gaze upon the hillside at the architecturally impressive buildings of the Northfield Seminary.
Well, we moved to Northfield in 1981, and we used to drive across the bridge then. It was very narrow, I will say, coming down East Northfield Road, and kind of stopping. Then you had to do almost a 90-degree angle turn.
In addition to the seminary buildings in view, the elegance of the bridge heralded the large and architecturally significant homes, especially Mr. Schell's chateau.
Obviously, things have grown up. Back at that time, the whole hillside, all of the hillside in Northfield was pretty much field and not wooded. And so now everything's grown up, and you don't see things quite as well, but you can still see the vista of the campus, which is interesting in that the campus is now vacant and looking for another purpose. So,
when federal interstate highway travel replaced the railroad, Schell Bridge took on a new function. For Northfield residents, the bridge continued as a means to get around town or travel into Vermont.
I've lived in Northfield for 35 years, and I remember the bridge and spent a lot of time going over that bridge on a bicycle and over that bridge by car, and that was our main route to Brattleboro for a long time.
And because I was here summers, I often was traveling over that bridge with my bicycle, and I can remember going over and meeting people that were coming. I remember one time the congressman, one of the western congressmen, Dewey Short, was in Northfield, and my responsibility was to go across the bridge and meet him at the train and bring him into Northfield. I do remember after the great flood, hurricane in, what was it, 38, being on the bridge and being ordered off the bridge. But because the water was, it seemed like it was just beneath my feet as you stood out on the bridge. And at that time, the river cut a whole new channel on the other side of the bridge, which when the waters receded, it returned to its regular river bed.
For boaters, canoeists, and kayakers, the bridge was a landmark as they journeyed south along the Connecticut River. Over time, the bridge degraded into disrepair. Safety became a concern. The bridge was closed. At the 1987 town meeting, a vote was held to demolish the bridge, and it passed.
We've planned a lot of bike rides out in this area over the years with our families. And I was looking at a map, planning a trip, and I said, hey, look, we can go across this bridge up here. And so when we got up here and came down to the bridge, of course, there was a big steel plates across the end of it, so we couldn't ride across it. But we did get to take a look at it. That was back in the early 90s, just after they closed it. So
I think it was about in 1985, between 1985 and 1987, the Mass Highway inspected it and said it was unsafe and that the bridge should be closed.
In 1987, there was a vote that the bridge should be put out of service and demolished because the town would not be able to support the maintenance of the bridge, even if it were fixed.
But that vote was a very strange vote because at the same town meeting, they also voted to save the bridge, and I don't remember the details of it, but there was an overwhelming feeling that people wanted to keep the bridge open. But I do believe there were probably people got up and said this bridge is going to fall into the river and the town is responsible, and people just got nervous about that. Somebody from the state highway said to me, if you get 3 feet of snow on that bridge, it's going to come down. And that was about 20 years ago and hasn't come down. So the bridge sort of stayed there closed for a long time. And I don't think back in 1987 that people particularly realized the possibilities of bicycling and footpaths in the area. But the interest has grown enormously in that. And suddenly we thought, hey, why don't we open this bridge and have people cross it by foot or by bicycle?
And Maureen Spalding came to the commission and said, do you know anything about this bridge? We got to save it. And so we, as a commission, took up the idea of doing something about this bridge.
When the whole Save the Schell Bridge idea began, it really began more as a historic preservation activity, to preserve something that was really special historically and architecturally.